Welcome, Arlington residents. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in today to celebrate Black Lives Matter Day in the township of Arlington with us. My name is Zane Crute, and I'm the president of the Mystic Valley area branch of the NAACP. We cover Arlington amongst other neighboring towns. We want to stand today and remember the many Black lives that were lost to police killings this year and other years, as well as other vigilantes, which we didn't see appropriate justice taken. We want to continue to push and to fight for a more just and equitable society. We stand with the Township of Arlington. We stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. We stand with the Human Rights Commission in calling for justice. We want to see justice going today. We want to see justice going tomorrow. We want to see a better society for all. Membership in the NAACP, Black Lives Matter, and the fight to abolish systematic racism is more important than ever. We invite everyone to take this step, to stand with us like you're doing today, tuning in, to fill out a membership for the NAACP, to support Black Lives Matter, to support legislation to help, make a more just policing system. We want to invite everyone to take these steps with us. We want to continue to fight. Remember, all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Push past the uncomfortableness of having to decenter yourselves in a conversation you probably never had to have around the kitchen table before. Check in with not just yourselves, a lot of you do humanitarian efforts and you give back, and that's amazing, but have you ever checked in and asked how it actually impacts the people? Have you ever asked the people you help, is it working? Those are some things I would ask you to consider. I would also ask you to consider following local Black organizers in Arlington. It seems like the HRC has a good grasp on what needs to happen, and I'm here to support them. And I think that turning your passion and even your pain into something that's sustainable is a very interesting topic and tool, and I'd be more than interested to explore that with you at a later time. Thank you.
I typed it into the calendar thing. Going back all the way to July 2nd, 1964. So that's not a long time ago. Often at times when people tell me that slavery ended such a long time ago, being from Boston, Massachusetts, I think about the Boston busing incident that happened here in the North, right? We think that we're so far removed away from slavery, but white people were rioting in the streets, really. To ensure that Black children did not get on school buses in Boston, Massachusetts, well into not just the 70s, but the last appeal that was filed for it was in 1989, before all the appeals had been exhausted. So with that, I say that none of this has happened more than a long time ago. And then put it in further perspective, my mother was born the year after the Civil Rights Act was passed. She was born in 1965. We're talking 2,700 weeks ago. So still, not a long time. It's not even a lifetime for most people since that legislation had been passed. As we know, one of the many things that the Civil Rights Act did, or attempted to do, was end segregation. So with the example of the Boston busing I just provided, we know that that did not happen as quickly and efficiently as a pen signing a piece of paper would have allowed. That included desegregating the bathrooms and water fountains throughout the country, the entire country, but especially in the South where that was common practice. So at this time that we're talking about, still 1964, I'm remembering y'all with, there were still signs all over saying whites only and coloreds only. And with the stroke of that pen that I was talking about, when that legislation was passed in 1964, all of the signs came down. And with that, we ended racism and everyone lived happily ever after. And I'm done with my speech. Thank you all. No, but seriously, those signs actually stayed up for years, decades. Through the 60s and 70s, I even heard some Floridian bar just ended up taking their sign down because the state made them in the 1980s. Now, even though the signs were technically illegal after 1964, we know that the police and the courts actually still enforce their policing and their legislation as if the signs were still up. So it wasn't exactly a priority to get them taken down, and that's why it took so long. So in many parts of the country, as you know, the signs still stayed up. But even in places they were taken down, the facilities remained segregated. Like, Black folks knew what water fountain or bathroom belonged to them, and white folks knew what bathroom or water fountain belonged to them. And there was still this understanding, if you will, that Black people could get seriously hurt, boy, for using the wrong one, even though the sign wasn't there anymore. So in a lot of ways, taking down those signs, if they even came down, was symbolic, a gesture. And the passing of the Civil Rights Act, while important, super important, didn't remedy the situation, not even by a long shot. And in a way, passing that legislation actually caused white people to level up on their racism. Because even when the signs came down, there were still 2 fountains. Can y'all say that with me? 2 fountains? That's a concept I'm gonna be running with today. There was no law saying that you had to get rid of the second fountain, which doesn't make much sense. It's actually weird in a way, right? It's kind of like our 2 legal systems. Police unions and politicians will say, hey, we're not being racist. We're following the extent of the law. The signs are down. We don't single out these Black people. Okay, that might be true, but like the way this is set up, there's still 2 systems, just like there are still 2 fountains. And I remember being in Warrenton Elementary School when I was growing up in Pensacola, Florida. There were 2 fountains, and then they introduced gender as the replacement, right? The boys and the girls fountain, when you know that that's not what they were there for, right? And so why did you even have to separate it by gender? It's water, drink it. It's like mainly Black kids being gunned down by cops, if it's really still like just one system, right? Jails are overwhelmingly filled with Black folks. There's still 2 fountains, y'all. Say it with me, 2 fountains. Do y'all see them? Because I see them. And of course, people will say, well, we're not breaking any laws, Dee Dee. We took the signs down. It's less obvious now. What more do you want? What more do you want? Ooh, Jesus. All right. That's actually a comment I see whenever I'm arguing with white folks on the internet. I was actually doing it in the pulpit. Don't tell Robin. Oh, shit. Okay. A white person will say, slavery ended, Dee Dee. You're equal now in the eyes of the law. What more do you want? Well, a lot. That's actually what I'm here to talk to y'all about today, what I want. Because 1 year ago, right here at Beacon UU in Summit, New Jersey, a sign was put up. A sign was put up. And that was important too, super important. And it was also largely symbolic. But when I look around my community, whether it's Boston or Summit, or even this congregation, I still see the 2 fountains, if you will. I know still what my place is in society. Whether the signs are there or not, the systems haven't changed. So maybe we need to take it a step further and remove them. Because that's when things really start to get uncomfortable. That's when people have to start making decisions that will actually impact society. That's when people can no longer simply ignore the signs because we followed up the gesture of the symbolism with actual change, with direct action. I think one thing white people struggle with, hold on to your seats, white folks. I just don't want you to go anywhere, okay? I think one thing y'all struggle with is how do we remove inequity? That's the question everyone's always asking. Well, what more can I do? What more do you want? What more can I do? How do we fix it, right? How do we fix racism? I actually got asked that last night. How do we remove the second fountain? Do any of you know how we're gonna remove the second fountain? Nope, okay, cool. So that's this question. And you know, white people, y'all like to ask me clarifying questions too when it's something that doesn't affect you, like, oh my God, do we need a permit first? Don't we need a certified plumber to remove this fountain? And we don't want to damage the building. We've been here for 10 years. Can't we just reform the fountain? No, we can't. And I think that that's why there's a lot of tension in our country right now, because we've ignored our greatest sins for so long, y'all. We've let this inequity build and exist while we talk about how we're going to handle it. We even offer more symbolic gestures here and there, and a few of our issues may get resolved somewhat. But ultimately, we've not actually taken the steps to dismantle the root cause of what the tension is. You feel it, but you can't name it because you don't have an answer for how to solve it, right? So let's speak from my own experience, right? Because mostly I'm talking about y'all now. I want to talk about me, if that's okay. I've spent many, many years of my life as an oppressed person. Some people actually think it's fun, like they think that Black people have all the cool things, right? I'm here to tell you that as a woman, as a Black person, as someone who is queer, as someone who is differently able-bodied, as someone who is cash poor, and most recently, someone who has become a single mother, I'm here to tell you that oppression is not fun. And I've spent a lot of my life having to do this forced research about how to make my life better, how to make that of my child's life better. And then when I see other single moms, or now I'm starting to see other queer folk, or now I'm starting to see other disabled folk, or now I'm starting to see other Black folk, I'm like, wow, how can I make your life better too? How can we figure this out together, right? I've come up with, during this forced research, I've come up with 3 things that I think I might have the answer for. And don't quote me, y'all know, or y'all should know that Black people are not monolithic. They're not. I might have a different viewpoint than Mia. I have a different viewpoint. I think I do accept all the teachings of Bell Hooks, but I have a different viewpoint on how she sees Beyonce. I mean, it doesn't mean like, I'm the devil, right? I've come up with what I believe are 3 things that need to be understood socially if we ever hope to dismantle systemic oppression and white supremacy. So are y'all okay with me running through those 3 things really quick? Yeah. Cool, maybe we'll get somewhere today. All right, so again, these are 3 things that need to be understood before we can dismantle white supremacy and oppression. So I need y'all to get comfy with your neighbor, even if you didn't like the way that she made the cookies at the last event y'all had. I need y'all to start talking to each other and say it to your neighbor. Things have to get worse before they get better. Now, isn't that a weird thing? So let me explain. There's a story about Frederick Douglass, right, that I remember growing up in grade school, and people used to say, when Frederick Douglass was on his deathbed, it's rumored that he had said, so he was asked, what is the way that African-American folks can get free? And while he was dying, he said, agitate, agitate, agitate. So can y'all say that with me? Agitate, agitate, agitate. Y'all sound like y'all some agitators up in here. Cool. So, and there's another quote from about the same time period from a woman named Ernestine Rose, which goes, agitation ought to be the motto of every reformer. Agitation is the opposite of stagnation. One is life, and the other is certain death. Now, the purpose of agitation is to transfer the pain from Black folks or from marginalized folks onto the folks that have privilege over us. I'm not comfortable, so why should you be comfortable? Thank you. So we want to escalate the tension. We want you to be upset about not getting to work, because guess what? Some of us don't have jobs, and it's not because we're lazy, it's because we're Black. I want things to get worse. Because if those who benefit from our oppression are not made uncomfortable, they have no reason to change their behavior. Did y'all see, there was an article that popped up on my newsfeed 2 days ago where a pastor had to apologize for his wife for saying that they should stop talking about racism in church because Jesus was gonna come fix it when he comes. Y'all laughing, but a lot of y'all think somebody's gonna come fix racism and it don't gotta be you. Now, this is a tough sell, right? I can't imagine y'all walking out of here today and say, you know what, that Didi Delgado, she's right. I'm gonna tell all my friends that I wanna make America worse again. Will y'all join me? there's a reason that Donald Trump's slogan is the exact opposite of what I'm preaching today. He says, make America great again. And I'm here telling you, I want to make things worse because that's the only way we're ever going to make things truly better. And if you think about it, shouldn't my messaging be the exact opposite of a white supremacist like Donald Trump? So it's really not that far-fetched when I say, make it worse. This is why my message to you today is not one of reform. Reform only works when you have a good foundation to build and improve upon. Our current systems like policing, housing, unemployment, capitalism, you name it. Thank you. And yeah, name it. What else is there? Healthcare. Y'all don't know no other systems? Extracurricular activities are oppressing people. Politics, judicial legislation. Yes, thank you. Military. Ooh, don't even get me started. Justice. Thank you. Everything in this country was set up with white people in mind. And I'm actually gonna pause what I'm reading for a second and tell y'all a story. This Friday, I got released from the hospital at 6 p.m. And immediately after, I was like, do I make the decision to go make money? A lot of my speaking engagements are how I make my living, right? And so I was like, I'm gonna go serve on this panel with Hollis Watkins, who's a SNCC veteran. And SNCC is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Thank you for the education elders last night. And he is an elder now, and he just wrote this book, so he's promoting the book, and I was honored to be on the panel with someone who walked alongside of Martin Luther King and was part of this movement that spawned into what we now know as the Black Panthers, and to Mumia, and to a lot of leftist groups that were anti-apartheid, right? So all these great leaders came out of SNCC, right? You think of Elaine Brown, you think of Angela Davis, right? All SNCC folks, right? When they were very young, they were involved in this organization. And so I'm on the panel with him, and Carl Williams from the ACLU of Massachusetts is on this panel with us. And he was like, for those of y'all who are upset about the Colin Kaepernick thing, whatever you're calling it, right? Because I can sit here and address you all daily, right? He was like, I think it's interesting that people use patriotism and saying it's un-American to not kneel for the flag or for the national anthem or for anything that we've created, when essentially the document that upholds these things, whether it's the Constitution, whether it's the Star-Spangled Banner, all of that was written with the intent for white people to rule over Blacks and Indigenous folks. And so people will say, but it's been amended, it's been changed, it's over, it's done. But the funny thing about white supremacy, I find it amazing, actually, how precious it is to white people that instead of removing something that was so hateful and harmful, it's literally left in the document and just added in as an amendment. This document that we all hold so holy and get emotional about, enough to argue with our friends, with our family, enough to make decisions for Black folks, literally still says that Black people are 3/5 of a person. Literally says that American Indians should only be used for tax purposes. So I just had to say that because it's been sitting with me all day since Friday, all this weekend since Friday. So all those systems we talked about, they're built with the purpose of oppressing people, especially people of color. I don't want to reform those things. Reform is actually not going to work in this instance because we see that it's 2017, and even though there's freedom of speech, Colin Kaepernick is not free to speak his mind, whether it's silently or outwardly. They need to be completely disrupted and dismantled. These systems are not broken. They're working exactly as they were designed to work. There's nothing to fix or improve upon. We've already tried that. They're as perfect as they are brutal. They cannot be reformed. I have to say that. We just need to start over. When I was younger, I used to do a whole bunch of ratchet things. My mother, we were raised Pentecostal. And I remember that my mother didn't want us watching secular television. So she had a code on the cable box. We could only watch approved channels. And then if you wanted to watch a channel other than that, you had to put a child lock code into the remote control. And so I used to stay up late and just enjoy the Christian programming that was on TV at 10 and 11 o'clock at night. And when I was 10 years old, I remember that I used to get in trouble all the time because I had a serious problem with authority. I'm so glad I got past that stage. So glad I'm reformed, right? But I remember watching an episode of the 700 Club. Show of hands, are any of y'all familiar with the 700 Club show? All right. There's some of y'all in here. Some of y'all are like, what? All right. Okay, so if y'all don't know, this is a terrible show. And for those of y'all who do know, you know what I'm talking about. I can't believe it's actually still on the air, but I flipped through Google and it's still a running show, right? For those of you who don't know, it's a conservative Christian show where Pat Robertson is the lead host and the Reverend and all this other stuff. So I'm watching the show late one night when I shouldn't have been. And they're talking about domestic labor and house cleaning and all that stuff about how cleanliness is next to godliness, right? And that it's a woman's job to do the domestic labor in the house. It's a terrible show. But at one point, they cut to a segment about the proper way to clean out a drawer. And this always stuck with me. They said in order to clean a cluttered drawer, you have to dump it all out and start all over. Then one of them picked up the drawer and actually dumped everything out onto the table they're all standing around, right? And everything went flying everywhere and everyone was kind of shocked. This one lady actually clutched her pearls. That's not something you can make up. So long story short, because I know I'm losing time, I feel like that they made a good point though. Sometimes the mess we're in is so chaotic and so hopeless, you just have to make a bigger mess before you can clean it up, if that makes any sense. And I think it's important that those committed to this work realize this. When you see riots and uprisings, when you see conflicts, when you see violence, these are inevitable as they are necessary to clean up this mess. So just remember, things have to get worse before they can get better. Thank you. Number 2, get comfortable with your neighbor again. And you might have to whisper this because you might feel shocked by having to repeat this. One thing I noticed is that white folks love to be individuals when you call out a community problem amongst white folks. If I say all white people are inherently racist, white people start scrambling. Not me. I have 3 friends and my accountant is Black and my day laborers are Mexican and I am very diverse in my neighborhood, right? And it's okay. You can be working towards dismantling your racism, but it's not a personal affront to you specifically if I say all white people are racist, because community-wise, it's true. So number 2, I need you to say to your neighbor, white people have no idea what they're doing. I'll say it louder for those in the back. White people have no idea what they're doing. Some white people, wow, right? And yeah, and I'm going to explain to you how I came to that conclusion, because remember, this is my experience, right? A little over a year ago, I noticed that my social media platform was growing for whatever reason. Every time I put out an article or a long Facebook rant, I'd get a few more hundred followers, then a few thousand more. I have no idea. I literally had 700 friends one day, and I woke up to 9,000 followers. A lot of these people were white folks looking for free political education. And I realized that I was gaining social capital faster than I could spend it. And social capital, if you don't know, is a form of currency. It's also a form of privilege. Social capital basically means that I have a network that listens to what I say, and it trusts me for whatever reason. It's kind of like winning a popularity contest in this weird way, which sounds great, but as with most popularity contests, it comes at someone else's expense. If I have the social capital, it's very easy for my words to drown out the voices of others. So if people are coming to me for their political education, but I'm not talking about certain issues, it's effectively detracting from those people and their movements and what their concerns are. So I figure I have to be very careful about using my platform to uplift marginalized people, especially those in groups I don't belong to. So I started talking a lot about Black trans women, Black trans antagonism, and sharing the writings of other Black women and femmes, other disabled women, sex workers, fat and dark-skinned women, you know, the people no one really care about. And I also started using my platform to seek reparations for these same groups. Now, at first, I would make a Facebook post asking people to donate a specific campaign or a GoFundMe page. But despite the fact I had a relatively large following, I noticed that these asks were not being met. And people weren't necessarily reading the words or articles that had been uplifting. It seemed like people didn't care. And as a side note, I was with another UU person from White Plains. They drove up here to see me last night. And we were at the restaurant in the Hilton where I was staying. And this gentleman and his lady friend sit down next to us. And they saw that we were eating chicken. Now, this woman and I are both Black women. And we're both rather large women. I weigh 240 pounds and I'm 5'8". She's probably a little bit larger than me. And she's shorter than me. So, you know, that size proportion does something, right, to people's minds. And the guy goes, "Hey, I want what they're having," to the waitress. And she says, "I'm sorry, sir, but the kitchen is closed." And he was like, "Well, they have wings." And she was like, "Yeah, but they've been here before the kitchen was closed." And I don't even have to tell you what the ethnicity of this person was who was asking all these questions, do I? And so he and his partner started to talk about how unfair it was that even though we'd gotten here first, that we had food and they didn't. And then when I was eating my chicken, because I think that that's what you're supposed to do when you have food in front of you is eat it, he literally made like a sound of disgust. And I had to get up from my seat because I didn't want to have to correct him. You know, y'all should know I have no problem correcting white people. But I didn't want to have to correct him because I really wanted to enjoy my food and my company. And I just think about how that's the normative thing. If you are a cisgendered heterosexual white male and you have class privilege, looking at someone like me who's cash poor and someone who's overweight, right? And then adding Black to it makes me like the untouchable. And I think that we need to like mirror check ourselves when we do things like that. At first, I would make a Facebook, so although I started using my platform in a way that I hoped would help others, my advocacy I felt had become performative, right? And that means I started out with good intentions, but there was no actual result. Does that resonate with any of y'all? Yeah, right? There was no benefit aside from the fact that I was gaining even more social capital from being such a good ally to these groups. So I started experimenting with the asks to see how I could go from performative allyship to more substantiated results. And in doing so, that's when I realized that white people are completely clueless. And I'm gonna give you all the examples. If I ask people to pay reparations, sometimes I'd get inboxes asking, how much money should I pay? Or asking, is there an easier way than you just listed to pay? Or asking, can you see if I paid? Do you have a receipt for me? I couldn't tell if white people wanted my approval or they just didn't know how to do what I told them to do. We are a society that has come to expect instant gratification, and as with everything, that expectation gets compounded by privilege and entitlement. So I started changing the way I'd ask white people to give reparation. Example. The following Black femme is in dire need of groceries to sustain her and her 3 children. Please donate $10 to this PayPal account. If you do not have PayPal, then use this Venmo account instead. And after you have completed the payment, write "done" in the comments so I can keep track of who has paid. Then brush your teeth, turn out the lights, and go to bed. My post became so specific that I felt like I was being condescending. I was actually like, this is not gonna work. But it actually did work. Show of hands, how many of y'all have actually heard the phrase "follow Black leadership"? Not many people have heard that. A lot more work needs to happen in Summit. So if you don't realize how hard it is, if you're not following Black leadership, that's why it's hard to lead white folks. That's why when a Black person then doesn't ask, that's why there's all these questions. If you're doing the process of having beloved conversations, if you're doing the process of having anti-racism work groups and things like that, but you're not following Black leadership alongside of that, and following means reading the writings of crafted Black authors, it's free. Y'all, we do not pay Black authors. I think that Teen Vogue offered me $150 to write something for them, and I'm just like, You're Teen Vogue, you make millions of dollars. Why would you give me 150 and think that that's okay when it's going to be in print forever? And I've also included a list on the back of the poem of writers I follow, right? Give them $3 for a cup of coffee. It's not going to cost you anything. You would pay for a copy of the New Yorker or the New York Times for Sunday to get all your information. Stop getting free political education from Black women and femmes. And some of you who didn't raise your hands, I wonder if you even knew it was available for free on the internet, right? You need to be constantly reminded and instructed, and it can be exhausting. You know, I was talking to some of your folks of color last night, and before they even opened their mouths, I could see that they're doing a lot of the emotional labor for y'all. And it shouldn't be that way. Yes, do the work amongst yourself, but knowing that Black people are not monolithic, lean on the writings of these people of color that are on the internet that I've listed. Google, search. Then if you have questions, do the initial work. And then if you have questions, then come up with it, you know? Capitalism has ruined our understanding of wealth redistribution and what that entails. So it's not totally your fault, right? Income inequality is at an all-time high, and the people on the losing end of this deal don't always have the time to spell out how you're supposed to rectify that. Thank you. So when I say follow Black leadership, that doesn't mean don't take any initiative. Just wait for me to call you and be like, hey, do you remember the time I told you that Books and Breakfast is happening down the street? You should probably go to that. No, like, be like, I think I'm gonna go to Books and Breakfast because it's held by Black folks, right? If Black folks ask you to come to a rally, just show up. This is a true story. How many of you knew that white supremacists came to Boston, Massachusetts last month? Yeah. When I got the notification, I decided to contact Monica Cannon and ask her, did she need help? And so the entire Black Lives Matter network need to be in charge of the action for the day. And I just could not believe that 45,000 people had showed up. But if you don't believe me because you're skeptical about what I'm saying, type in Fight Supremacy and go to the Facebook group, Facebook event page. You will see all the questions that white people asked me about showing up to Boston Commons just to fight white supremacy. How do we fight white supremacy? Should I bring a book bag? Do I need to bring a jacket? Is there gonna be water provided? Should I bring tea or coffee? Is there a ride share? I think I even made a joke out of, it's terrible what I did, but I think I made a joke out of one person's question because she was like, can you help me find a buddy so I can walk around the common? Yeah. And so I couldn't help it. I was like, yes, pick a number from 1 to 10. And she picked 8, I think. And I was like, great. I was like, what I'm going to do is put you into a random generator and then pick one of the 45,000 people and pair you up with the number that they picked. And then we'll do it that will connect you with them. And she was like, great. It's like she wanted me to do the work for her to find a walking partner in this march, you know? So don't ask Black leadership 1,000 questions, right? And I tell you that if you look at the Fight Supremacy page, those questions were asked over and over again because I know that people did not take the time to just look at the FAQs that we took the time to post. Will this be a nonviolent march? This is a violent and nonviolent march. Will this be can you denounce nonviolence? Do you want me to specifically say it's not, you know, just, it's all the extra things, right? That y'all can already, if you look up Black Lives Matter guiding principles, we clearly say that we are committed to nonviolence, right? But also are noting that we're never gonna shut down anyone who has to exude violence because we live in a violent state right now. If we ask for reparations, just pay them. Give what you can. Don't overlook the ask just because no one was willing or able to hold your hand through the whole process. Because I figure that's why asks aren't getting done. Because people are like, well, I really don't know how to go about doing that, so I'm just not going to do it, and maybe I'll do it later or another day. Because that's making the job of Black leadership harder than it already is and harder than it has to be. And lastly, number 3, this is the last thing you have to say to your neighbor until the benediction. It's going to be great. Understand that this is a long road, and we may never live to see the results. Cool. I once wrote, white allies treat dismantling racism like they're demanding to speak to the manager at Whole Foods. That's my best line ever, I think. What I meant by that was we need to realize that there's no quick fix to fixing white supremacy. And if you go into this work thinking that there will be more good days and there are bad, you're mistaken. Because the things that we're up against are monumental. That's why community organizing is so important, because apathy and fatigue are so real, y'all. We need reinforcements. We need to pace ourselves and make sure our work outlives the immediacy of our existence. Because when we get bored, or when we burn out, or we die, it's going to be our legacy that lives on to fuel the future generations, right? That's what we're driving off of, right? So last month, 5 monstrous hurricanes devastated much of the Caribbean and parts of Florida and Texas. There was an earthquake that hit Mexico. And after the first 2 hurricanes, I was done. And I live in Boston, so not one drop of rain or gust of wind, and I was overwhelmed, right? That's my privilege, right? During the same month, 5 more trans people of color were killed. At least 2 gender nonconforming folks were murdered by police. Officer Jason Stockley was acquitted in the murder of Anthony Lamar Smith, and in response, St. Louis erupted in protest. And Donald Trump was Donald Trump all month long. Yep, that all happened in 1 month. And I could sense the frustration within myself and amongst my circle. So I wrote this status that read, "Are you overwhelmed with the sheer number of people who need help right now? Don't be. Give what you can. Help where you can. Be generous. Budget your time and resources so that you aren't over or underextending yourself. Encourage others to care and realize the importance of wealth distribution. Keep focusing on the most marginalized. It's not your job to save everybody, but it is our collective job to make sure everyone is taken care of. We all will win." And I didn't believe a word of that when I wrote it. I was just like, I need some positivity in my life. This is a messed up month. But I actually believe it now. And I need to believe it. And I know that others actually need to hear that too. That's actually one of my most commented on posts, because people felt like a relief, like I can sit in this space and pick it up again tomorrow. So when doing this work, when you find yourself getting overwhelmed and frustrated, take a step back. Realize that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And you may not see the change you want to see in the time you expect to see it in. This is largely thankless work. People should not be giving you kudos for doing a good job to dismantle the problem your ancestors created. Learn to savor the moments when it's rewarding, because they will be few and fleeting. But that makes them all the much more beautiful. And know the road that we walk on has been forged by generations of tireless freedom fighters. We walk in the same trails as Mama Tubman and Sojourner Truth. We sit in the same seat as Claudette Colvin and Rosa Parks. We echo and uplift the same words as Celia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. And those are some big shoes to fill. And our success isn't measured in how quickly we can fill those shoes, but in how long we're willing to keep them on. Thank you.
Amazing. That was amazing. And I want to bring Dee Dee back in here as we sort of debrief what we just listened to. Dee Dee, tell me, where do we go from here? We talked about moving beyond banners. Your speech talked about that. What's the next step for the folks in Arlington here?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I just want to say that, you know, listening back, because it's 2020, and hearing it all over again, I think about how some people will say that the banners and street murals that are happening all over are performative because it's not the systemic change we're fighting for. And they might be right? But this isn't a zero-sum game. I will tell the residents of Arlington that symbolism does matter. Representation also matters. That's why people vandalized the first banner, remember? Because it was representing something. And that's why white supremacists are really mad that racist statues are coming down, because symbols do have power and they can undermine power. And while symbolic gestures alone are not good enough, they are still long overdue. So I don't want anyone to think that because I'm asking you to push a little bit further, since it took a long time for us to get here, I don't want you to think that because I'm asking you to lean into the uncomfortableness of moving beyond the banner, that the banner isn't a good first start. But we have to talk about why these inequities exist even still today. Some 60 years after this, some 50 something years after the civil rights, why does it exist today? And I feel like a lot of times people get caught up in the linguistic disagreements more than the moral ones. Because I think about when we talk about, there's a lot of talk right now in legislation. You see what happened in Minnesota, you see what happened in LA, that there's, in terms of defunding, cops may not want their budgets cut for police in general, but even police officers are sick of all the responsibilities we leave to them. Everything from calling the cops for a cat being stuck in the tree to domestic dispute to an individual having respiratory issues, cops have to show up for everything. And I think that that's why they're on high alert for everything that they respond to. When I talk about demilitarization, I mean it as a way to stop hyper-policing communities as a replacement for social programs and initiatives. Because y'all know as well as I know that cops are not mental health experts. Most of them are not. Cops aren't doctors, they're not drug treatment specialists, and they're not child abuse or women's rights activists. Cutting the responsibilities of police is the only thing most people that are police officers actually agree with me on. And I can say that as someone whose family member is a top ranking special operations officer with the Boston PD. I love my uncle very much. And we have to have these really strong winded conversations because we're all in this together if we say we want freedom. When I talk about wealth redistribution, I think about the next steps for a lot of folks is already here. Everywhere I turn, I just did a call with the Cambridge Community Foundation. Everywhere I turn, people are talking about mutual aid and how much they've raised. And people understand fundamentally that when something bad happens, we have to be here for one another. The reason why I talk so much about wealth redistribution is because I have a Facebook status that I made several years ago that is still so relevant today. I ask people, can you name an example of generational wealth, even if you, like me, come from a single parent home? Can you name an example? And people push themselves. There were some people who said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I got here because of my hard work. I'm here because I got a scholarship, or my uncle put money aside, and then it started to come out a little bit. So your uncle put money aside, or your mother's brother allowed y'all to move in when your parents got divorced, and it's like these little tiny things. But Black folks, it's like y'all had a running head start, and it's not a bad thing if you acknowledge it, right? If you say, wow, I'm just now realizing, what can I do? And it goes back to what I said in the video. What more do you want? I think that folks in this country, folks in Boston, folks in Cambridge, folks in Arlington, who are people of color, even if they disagree with what I'm saying, I think that people in this town, in this city, in this America are long overdue an apology. And don't get me wrong, don't start going up to random Black folks and Indigenous folks and being like, we're sorry. Don't do that. It's kind of late for that. But make your actions match your emotion, right? Because I know somewhere that uncomfortableness is hiding like this. It is a mask for like, oh, I have to acknowledge this, and I think that's why it's taken people so long. I'm at work. I'm an executive assistant during my day job, and I have an LLC in the evening. And at my job, I work at a nonprofit organization that primarily is all C-level executives, and they're all non-Black. There's not one person of color at my place of employment except for me, and I'm the executive assistant, so I don't have any bargaining power. I'm not on the board of directors, which is all white. But we know that systemically, when we're talking about persons born into poverty, the majority, 79%, is Black and brown folks, right? And so if y'all can understand the fact that COVID is a pandemic globally, and that we all have to band together in order to make something work because our current systems are not working for us, I would really encourage you to sit down and have a conversation, because anytime I've had the conversation, The pushback is, well, that's the government's responsibility. And that may very well be true. But the government has been bulking on reparations for African Americans in this country. And we're not even talking about the fact that Arlington is sitting on stolen land for indigenous folks, right? They just got acknowledgement of Mount Rushmore being messed up. I mean, and that's just a little slice of their history that needs to be acknowledged. So when we talk about Black Lives Mattering, I really hope that y'all are serious enough to dig into following Black voices. And I would say that starts locally. And I mean, when I mean locally, I mean, I look at all the brown voices on this call who have reached out and said, hey, you might be a little extreme, but if we're super radical, they might fall in line somewhere in the middle with us, right? And that's all radicalism is pushing the envelope far enough. The PTA understands radicalism. Y'all will not allow nuts in these children's school because it's important that even though a small percentage of people may be affected by the allergy, you want to make sure that all people understand how serious it is. And so if we can do that on a baseline level for one another, if we can create these mutual aid funds for one another, then we can certainly understand that while reparations might take another 50 years, and I don't know, I'm hoping that it doesn't take another 25 years. I'm hoping that y'all can run with steam and say, okay, that legislation that's been kind of back and forth, Bernie Sanders brought it, Kamala Harris brought it, these people are arguing over it, Donald Trump will never agree to it. What does it look like, especially when you have a contender up for the next White House seat? You have a few contenders that won't talk about it. What does it look like for you to do your part the same way you've done mutual aid? What are the next steps when you look at your curriculum and it's absent of any kind of nominative Black history outside of the 17 stories you've been told your entire life about what Black History Month is, as if you only know 17 Black people? And if you only know 17 Black people, I just ask you to push a little bit.
Right.
And follow
Right.
people on the internet. Follow Allie Henny. Follow Ruby Bridges. Follow someone like myself, someone that you would never be in close proximity to. Follow Crystal and see what's going on her page. And when you feel uncomfortable or you feel like you want to divest because you didn't agree with one thing, remember that we're whole individuals and people. And just like you didn't agree with the one thing your mother said that one time, if it was one time, that you can still be in relationship with people and not engage with them on certain subjects. So
Dee Dee, thank you so much. A lot of topics there, a lot to digest here in town. And I want to toss it to Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator Jill Harvey as she moves us on to the next piece of work that the town is doing.
Unmuted. Thanks so much, Dee Dee. That was really wonderful, and that actually really speaks to some of what we're going to be doing with the town right now. So our next part of our series that we're doing is all about elevating suppressed voices. And so I do have some information on that as well. So we are still looking to have folks submit their pieces for that. And we are collecting some different opportunities for folks to share their voices, for people of color to share their stories, to share their narratives. And we'll be pushing that information out again. And in addition to celebrating this Black Lives Matters Day, we're going to be starting to set up a committee as well to kind of take that on, work on things throughout the year, and make sure that it's not just this one-off thing. So I want to thank you again so much for joining us tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to Sharon and Kristen, our chairs of the Human Rights Commission, to close it out.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Arlington values equity, diversity, and inclusion, and we are really committed to building a community where everyone is heard, respected, and protected.
So we'd like you to welcome you to go to the Arlington Human Rights Commission website, arlingtonhumanrights.org, for more resources as well as for upcoming events. And we thank you for joining us. Be well and have a really wonderful evening. Good night, everyone.